All right. Welcome to episode 83 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, you are from our offices in Atlanta. I'm from my favorite hotel in all of Philadelphia, the Study on University here, right next to Penn's campus. It's the place I stay sort of like every time I come here and teach. So at least I'm like Jacksonville playing in London. Like I'm on the road, but I'm familiar with my surroundings. Thomas, how was your weekend?
It's called The Study, Eric?
Yeah, The Study.
Oh, that's cool. So it's like you're like one of those like famous writers around the world that used to go into Paris and whatever arrondissement it was, and they would get their motivation. You'd sit in there and motivate your academic mind.
Well, this is why we become such good friends. We don't have similar tastes. I will say I think your tastes and mine are qualitatively similar. Numerically, of course, yours are much higher than mine, but I think qualitatively, like on your desk, you have Cal Newport's book. Cal Newport talks all the time about like retreating and concentration and avoiding. And like, even though, obviously we live in like much different times than even 20 years ago, but it is just nice every once in a while to like get somewhere. And, I did some teaching in person today, which is always cool. You scratch that itch. But for the most part, I'm just in this hotel, taking meetings, doing, trying to plan the future here at Sumer. So I'm excited for that. And to your point, like it does feel a little bit like you're getting away to write, even though I have not had a successful writing career like those guys.
Yeah, well, you were talking about Cal Newport very quickly. I was reading a little bit last night, and he was talking about Adam Grant, who's another. Isn't he he's a Wharton guy, right?
He's a professor here, yeah.
Yeah. Just fascinated by the approach to trying to keep focused in today's world where there's so much going on, and talking about focusing for 4 days on one topic, which is not how this generation approaches things. And I guess they were saying that, Adam Grant would have something on his door or whatever saying that he was out, and they're like, wait a minute, we see you in your office. So when I start seeing you put that sign in your office that you're out for the next 4 days, I'll sort of connect you with Cal Newport and Adam Grant and think that's, go ahead. You can turn your back on us for 4 days to focus on some great topics.
Well, doesn't it? And now that, like, hopefully we get some people here into the room before we talk running backs, but isn't it funny that, like, some of the times when I take PTO, it's not because I'm not going to work on Sumer stuff. It's almost entirely because I want a day without meetings. And I know, meetings are obviously very important, but like sometimes you just need 4 hours to write like your company, your wing of the business is planned for the next 6 months, right? And we meet so much, and everybody we talk to at Sumer is brilliant. So there's like, obviously I'm not complaining, but it's more of like you do it almost for the uninterrupted time to think, right? And I think that obviously the higher up you get in the world, CEO level like you, GM, management level, like it's probably even worse for you than somebody like me. And then, as I tell all my data scientists and people that work for me, it's like you got to protect those deep work hours or else no one else is going to, right? So you got to make sure that you have those hours to just sit there and think and contemplate things, because that's your currency. If you're a knowledge worker like we are and like they are, your thoughts are your edge.
Thoughts are your edge. I'm a big believer in painting your own masterpiece. I love reading, I love learning, but I do think along the way, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s and beyond, you all have an ability to paint portions of your masterpiece. And you have to have the time to think about it instead of like running roughshod, always tugged in every different direction. So that's a strong feeling I have, of course. Not proselytizing, but I just believe it.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're all looking for people to emulate, and obviously you've had a ton of success, so I don't think anybody's going to complain about you giving away some of your productivity secrets for sure. I think, speaking of secrets, last week on the show, it was a little awkward, I will say, but I do think that the conversation was still good. It, like, a lot of times when I'm thinking about, sound team building, I'm thinking about what the NFL is trying to do now. I look back at what you did with the Falcons. I look back at what you did with the Patriots as a director of college scouting, just for like little clues, because I feel like a lot of times what we're deriving, I feel like sports analytics, we derive 80% of what we do is validating what really smart people are already doing. Like, the Patriot paradigm, and obviously what you took with you to Atlanta. And then the other 20% is where the value is. And I think one place where sports analytics has added, in my opinion, value beyond what people thought traditionally was the running back situation, where, historically, like we've seen, somebody wrote in like Emmitt Smith's new contract in 1993 would be worth something like 30 million APY if you did the extrapolation now. There are no running backs making that. Adrian Peterson made 100 million in 2011. I don't know if another running back will touch that with their contracts ever again. The running back situation in the NFL is very dicey. We have a lot of players. I just want to pull this up because this has a couple of really interesting anecdotes. This is from our friends at Over the Cap. The first one, Thomas, is the number of players who make over 10 million a year, which is only it's only 8 players that make 10 million a year over that. The other thing I want to point out, Thomas, is that 3 of the 8 players that make over 10 million a year are currently on the franchise tag. So even they're only 1 year, no security really there other than the 1 year. And then the last part, Thomas, are 2 names I want to show. Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, taken in the top 12 picks of this round, are already in the top 20 in terms of pay at the position of running back. All of this shows the really difficult straits that this position is under due to a lot of competing factors, hopefully factors we'll talk about in a second. I just want to get your initial thoughts on this, Thomas.
Oh, wow. I mean, obviously, I love some of these top 10 players here. Love them. I love their abilities, their athleticism, their explosiveness, all the things we see as evaluators. And I'm thinking it's obviously surprising to see, the stats that you're bringing up here. I'm blown away by the fact that Bijan Robinson and I believe Jahmyr Gibbs on the guarantee side, I think Bijan is in the top 5 guaranteed in the league out the gate, right? Which I find.
I think if you go by this table, he's 4th behind just Kamara, McCaffrey, Henry. He has more guarantees on his current deal than Nick Chubb, a running back that many believe is the best in football, or at least one of them. And to your point about Gibbs is top 6 after you get through those few. So it's not even so it's an interesting discussion topic because these running back contracts, the ones that are picked, we always talk about the rookie wage scale being like this thing that underpays rookies or, rookie contract players. And that's true. But when it comes to running backs themselves, their pay has been so depressed that the rookie contract looks good relative to some of these other contracts.
Yeah, I mean, I look back on my time in the NFL and had a chance to be around some really good running backs. I mean, from all the way back in those earlier years, I'll go back to Detroit. It was around Barry Sanders, one of the very best to ever play this game. And there's a cat who pulled out early, right? He could have played for how many more years? It would have been interesting to see. He pulled out for a reason, of course. I think he was amazing. I look back at New England. We had Kevin Falk and Corey Dillon, right? 2 running backs that were really, really productive and very good players. Corey came from Cincinnati, of course, as a guy who had a little bit of wayward to him, but then Bill, of course, kept him in line. Both of those guys played their butts off for us in New England, all the way up to Atlanta when we kicked off our time there in free agency. It wasn't about drafting, but we bring in Michael Turner, who was a backup to LaDainian Tomlinson at the Chargers, fresh legs. I remember everyone saying, "My God, you're paying this much money for a running back at the time. You could probably pull up the numbers there." But we were so convinced with the power side of this guy. He was such a bruiser, but had such fresh legs. We thought if we got 3 years out of him, it would be great. I mean, he produced for us for 4+ years. He was a difference maker. He was a real big reason why Mike Smith and I survived in those early years of being, in a job back then which we're turning over a lot with GMs and head coaches. My point there is we had some good running backs during my years in different places, which I'm going to get to now. And yet I think they were all, for the most part, good value players. And look, remember this. This is not a dig on running backs. I love that running back list you're talking about. I feel for Austin Eckler having his comments, and what's he at 6 million plus right now?
Yeah.
I mean, in the real world, I guess, but I mean, in today's world, who he's being compared to, I feel for him. But remember, GMs and head coaches and organizations, they have a certain amount of money they're willing to pay, of course, at any position. And if they're going to find a value in a position, they're going to find the value. They're not just going to turn around and give an extra $5 million to someone, as we know, just to make them feel good. They may give them an extra few $100,000 on each contract year. But believe me, we know that. So I'm just being realistic about it from a business standpoint. Just like we've talked about tight ends, right, Eric? I mean, there are some really good running backs out there that have done really good things for teams. Let me just, I know I'm going to get back to you here, but I have a little bit of a feeling about this. I've said time and again about, our head coach here in Atlanta, when you look at Arthur Smith and what he does with that run game and what he did with Algiers, right? I mean, they did some ass kicking there. And I thought that was great. They turn around and pull a first round pick here, a really high pick, who I think is one of the best backs to come out in a long time. But there's going to be people in the community who are saying, well, you got a guy who was a mid rounder, if not more, or further down in the draft, who produced really well for you. Why are you, in fact, using such a high pick and such high money? And that's where there's a lot of discussion, right? What is the value of the position?
Yeah, it's so hard because, I mean, Algiers like the number one example, but you've I think identified the big thing where it's like there's just so many ways to win at the position, right? Like I think about, was it Antoine Smith was kind of that early runner for New England, kind of at the end, kind of ran his wheels off, gone, won a Super Bowl. Then you go Corey Dillon, right? Kevin Falk, but you think even beyond your years, Shane Vereen, James White, now Ramondre Stevenson, like it's just never been now they did take a first rounder in 2018 in Sony Michel. Sony Michel's on team 3 now, right? And even though he's had his moments, he's a good back. It's just these teams will discard them. And, your point is 100% right. Teams are just trying to find value. And I think about 3 different dynamics that are working against running backs. And some of them have changed, and some of them have always existed. We just chose not to necessarily deal with it. And data has been a really big thing about it. Is the first one is that running the football is not as efficient as passing. When you look at expected points, when you look at yards per play, the simplest way to look at it is the one time I can remember in my life a team averaging more yards per carry than yards per pass was the 2012 Vikings, where Adrian Peterson rushed for 2,000 yards. Their quarterback was so bad that Christian Ponder averaged fewer yards per pass attempt than Adrian Peterson. That's rarely ever happens, and that team only won 10 games. Their running game was so good, but they couldn't pass, so they only won 10 games. So running the football is not as efficient. The second part is running the football is about 11 men, and the running back is not the most important one of them. And I think that hurts too. Is that, and maybe, the most important player in the running game is the quarterback. Statistically speaking, it's how much the quarterback can control the safeties and all this, how much they can control. And then beyond that, it's the 5 offensive linemen, then it's the running back. And so running's not as successful as passing. The runner is not as big of a deal in the process as, say, a quarterback is to passing or a wide receiver is to passing.
I'm blown away that you say the most important person is the quarterback in the run game. That is you throw that out to an NFL organization and everyone would just go, come on, Eric. I get what you're saying. It's an interesting concept, only because we always go to the O-line, right? We're like, are you kidding me? Yeah. Like getting back to Atlanta and what they're doing right now, the way that everything is coming together with their run game, the O-line and how they operate, how people are pulling, et cetera, scheme. I think that's a huge thing. I mean, it's a huge thing. But the offensive line together is more important than the quarterback is by himself. But I think the quarterback, so the offensive line is easily the most important, but that's 5 guys. So I'm kind of dividing credit maybe. Okay. But I know what you're saying. Like, what do you think about that statement? How much of the run game would you give the quarterback in the modern NFL? Yeah, obviously it's important, and there's, it's different than it used to in modern day NFL. But again, I just continue. It just took me by surprise a little bit that it was even factored into this discussion because, and I get it, but most people in the NFL, if you're talking to organizations, they're just like, Okay, they're cashing that aside. Let's just be realistic about it, right? So we'll get to it. We'll talk about some other running backs as well. I don't mean to protract here, but it was just something that caught my attention, and I realized what you're saying. I don't know what percentage I would give it.
So you have the fact that running's not as efficient as passing. You have the fact that the runner is not as important as, some other high profile, which back in the day, I think maybe that's different when you had to be being an every down running back is a skill, being able to deal with the pounding and all that stuff. Players aren't really asked to do that as much anymore. And the ones that are, I think that's where you see some value in the NFL. When you look at that top end of the names, the guys like Chubb, the guys like Henry, but also where the top end guys falter, like McCaffrey and Kamara getting injured at times. And then the third big one, and this is the crucial one. This to me is the only place where you could ever get running backs paid more if that's what you set out to, is running backs peaks are just before any sort of money earning time. So here's something that Jason Fitzgerald at Over the Cap put up. This is average running back yards for every 1,000 yard rusher in the NFL over a certain time period. So you're looking at like your peak is year 2 if you're 1,000 yard back. Timo Riske, my former colleague at PFF, he did something similar. Running backs are in this middle on the top. So he's looking at corners, linebackers, safeties, tight ends, wideouts. Halfback, which is HB over here, has like the narrowest peak, and it happens the earliest of any position. So if you're a runner, your best time physically is either when you're in college, which bless their hearts, now they can get paid. That's good. And it's in that first 4 years, possibly 5th year of your rookie deal, where even though relative to other running backs, it's a good contract, a lot of guarantees, it's not that breaking the bank. When you look at the running back salaries right now, McCaffrey's the highest earner at 16 million APY, and Bijan Robinson's at more like 5.5 million APY. And that's for the 8th overall pick in the draft. So it's 3 times as much. So with all of these, those are the 3 competing factors, and they're all contributing to why the situation is the way that it is now.
So make no mistake about it. I mentioned earlier, GMs and owners are trying to find the value within their club. They know they're going to be paying out their ears in certain positions. So they're craving some of those positions that can keep balancing it. And it may cycle around, of course. It's unfortunate again for the running backs. But let's also say this. I know this will sound so dated and probably misaligned for most people out there, but most people aren't having the builders, the GMs, and the negotiators within the organization. They're not crying for the running back who's making $7, $8, $9 million because they're not making $20 million. They're saying you're making a pretty damn good wage. And unfortunately, that is the way it is. And they're moving on. They're not sitting there feeling really bad when they see that running back come through the building, give them the stink eye because of the lack of money they're making. They're saying, hey, man, it is unfortunately the way it is. And look, I go back to this, and I mentioned to you before, this was such an odd situation back in 2016. We had Devonta Freeman as our running back, right? I remember getting on the bus on the Wednesday of the Super Bowl week practices, and his agent throws out an article, and it just blows up that he wants a new contract, and he was basically complaining about it. I love Devonta. I thought Devonta as a young guy for us was exactly what your graphs are showing there, right? He was a very important reason that we got to the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, important reason. One of the reasons we tailed off in the end by missing a block and having a couple. Those things can happen, right? But I remember saying, like, man, the fact that we can get all we can get out of this running back as we can is amazing. Now, we set out the next year. We felt our backs were to the wall. I wish you could find the number that we signed him to, because I'll tip on my tongue. I don't remember it. But we paid him a nice contract. We weren't banging our heads against the wall trying to decide whether we wanted him. He was such an important part of our run game that we decided we were going to pay it.
Yep.
And
so you paid him $5 million, 5 years, $41.25 million, which that was 7 years ago. That would register middle of this list right here, right? And that's without adjusting for inflation. So you paid him a pretty good amount of money, right?
We paid him a good amount of money because remember what a running back also does for people. He is a tone setter on the, for the team. Not only just the offense, but when you get a guy that runs his ass off, I mean, Ezekiel and people, I mean, Henry, guys like that just set such a tone for the team that are looking for toughness and aggressiveness. And I love that side. And that's why I respect this goes all the way back to the days you watch the running backs. Most of the running backs have an air about them. They just slam through the line, they get up, right? They don't usually start piping back. Maybe Kevin Falk did, and some of those running backs and other Falks out there, of course. But most running backs just drop the ball and get back, right? There's some element of toughness to them that they're not complainers at all. So again, tone setters, good value. It's unfortunate.
Well, and also it's sort of strange because, and I promise this has a point, but every single Super Bowl since 2012, since the new CBA, has had a quarterback on a rookie deal, except for that 16 Super Bowl that included you guys and the Patriots, where you had Ryan and Brady. And all of the Super Bowls of that era that did not include like a Hall of Famer. And I think Matt's a borderline we don't know if he's going to make it, but he at least is in the combo. And if you don't have Mahomes, Brady, or Manning, all the other quarterbacks are either on a rookie deal or in one of these like super offenses, like a Shanahan or McVay offense. And I think a lot of people, when they look at a Shanahan or McVay offense, they respect the running game's clout in that offense. We talk about Todd Gurley, who you guys had, in Atlanta for a little bit. Todd Gurley was the Rams kind of engine until the guy's legs fell apart, right? In Atlanta, it was Coleman and Freeman. Everybody sort of thought, and by the way, this is my daughter Chloe making another appearance. Says hello, Chloe Dragon. Love you, Chloe. Go back to playing. So I think that everybody, when they watched your team in 2016, and honestly, I think people were scared of Tevin Coleman, maybe even a little bit more just because of his speed and stuff. But I think people looked at that offense and they know Matt Ryan's brilliant, but they also know that Matt's kind of outside that top tier of quarterbacks where he can do it with anybody. He was firmly in that second tier where if you gave him a Taylor Gabriel, Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, the tight ends you guys had, the O-line you had, and those running backs, was scary. And I think no one probably, I think Freeman, you ended up probably regretting that deal. But I think looking back at that offense and how scary it was, it made sense to want to, to keep some of those weapons in the fold.
We wanted to keep them. And again, that's not an easy situation to be when you have an owner knocking on your door, when we have tickets being sold, we have jerseys being sold. Again, people don't want to hear this. There's a lot involved when you're kind of in a momentum situation. The interesting thing that kind of the other side of the story is, Devonta Freeman ran his ass off. You want to talk about a hard running back. He was never going out of bounds in those early years. He was turning it back in and nutting up on whoever he needed to. I loved it. We all loved it. Interestingly enough, we, organization, management, as well as our running back coach, started telling him, hey, man, got to start pulling out a little bit, taking some of those, like, you have to step out a little bit, because he started suffering a couple concussions and we were worried about it. Crazy. All of a sudden, his game changed. Not only because of the concussions, but because everyone was telling him, you can't you can't run the same way. You want to prolong your career a little bit. We need you. It was a weird communication deal. The reason he got what he got, the reason he did for us what he did, was his pure roughhouse style of running. Mm-hmm. And it changed. And it changed when we paid him the money, not because he turned it off. I don't believe that. He didn't all of a sudden become soft. He just started overthinking, in my mind.
Well, and we had that this past season with Dalvin Cook, where I think Dalvin Cook still has every bit the explosiveness. When he gets out in the open, it's goodbye. But when you watch, he had that shoulder injury right around when he was supposed to sign his new deal. Delay, sign the new deal, never really got the shoulder, because how bad does it look when you wait for your extension, you get one, then you take care of the shoulder, then you're out, right? So he's played 2 years with a shoulder that was not corrected, and you watch, and when he gets in that open field, he's amazing, but he's taken down by one player now, right? And so, and this gets me back, because before we ever talk about solutions, and I know it's going to seem weird from your perspective, because your perspective is, look, there, as a GM, there's positions that are going to cost me an arm and a leg, and there are positions that aren't. That's okay. The balance of power, that's how it works. I'm trying to find value. I think I'll get to in a second, but like, the one question I have, the only way I can see this working itself out organically, meaning there are no changes to the CBA, there are no changes to the salary cap or anything, is the exact thing that you're saying, which is some of these running backs add value to their team from a intangible standpoint. When you watch Devonta Freeman stick it, 100 pounds smaller than the front seven, running his ass up in between the tackles, doing all the hard work, scoring all those touchdowns in the end zone, winning you games, and then they turn around and the running back has been the best player on your team since you were in grade school, and now the running back's being devalued. I think that to me is the one place where if other teammates start stepping up, then you could see a situation where it's like, no, we want this player in our locker room, and we're not going to stand for you not paying him or whatever. I don't see that happening, because every single individual player is trying to get their money too. And so I just don't see that happening. But to me, that's one thing where I could see players being like, no, this guy is actually really valuable in ways that you guys don't see. And I wish you guys would appreciate that.
Yes. I mean, look, you look all the way back. I was going to ask you if I can, historically, right? When you look back all the way back to, let's go back to, what's our big trade with Minnesota and Dallas?
Yeah, Herschel. Yeah.
What, the value of Herschel and how we perceived Herschel back then. I mean, obviously what Minnesota did, unbelievable, right? Or, just the way that went down and the values there. And I started thinking about that over the years and how important the back was, of course. Go ahead. Yeah. You're about ready to say something.
Well, running backs are always so, and this is kind of in my wheelhouse because I grew up in Minnesota. I love the Herschel Walker situation. But that 1988 Vikings team, they outscored their opponents by an average of 10 points a game. Yeah. Wade Wilson made the Pro Bowl. They had the number 1 overall defense in the whole league per yards. Chris Dolman, Keith Millard. We talked about that last week. And their leading rusher that year was Darren Nelson, who only had, Darren Nelson only had 380 yards on 3.4 yards per carry. They had Allen Rice. They had DJ Dozier, a Penn State player who they took in the first round in 87. But basically everything they tried at running back didn't work. And yet they're 11-5. They're best point differential in the league, blah, 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 blah. They get their ass kicked by Joe Montana in the playoffs. And they say the next season, they're like, the running back is the reason, right? And I always felt like back in the day, and you can corroborate because I know you were involved in team building and you have a better perspective. But I always felt like the teams that lost in January, they always bellied up to the bar and said the running back was why we couldn't win in the playoffs. And even though you look at the teams that won in the playoffs, yes, Dallas had a great running game. They also had Aikman and Irvin and Jay Novacek and a great passing game. San Francisco is with Montana and Rice and Young and all those guys. But the Vikings very much were like, look, we have everything. We have a Pro Bowl quarterback. We have great weapons. Anthony Carter, amazing. Steve Jordan's Cam Jordan's dad, a fantastic tight end, a great offensive line, good defense, and we still can't win the Super Bowl. Running back's got to be the reason why. And if you look at the salaries of all the running backs that have won the Super Bowl recently, it just simply hasn't been the case. And I think the Vikings were the first team to sort of make that error they were the second team to make that error because the Los Angeles Rams traded a ton or got a ton for Eric Dickerson too. But I think back in the 80s and 90s, the running game was seen as how you won in the playoffs. It was the toughness factor. And I think over the last 30, 40 years, we've just realized that in January, it's about having the best quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading that. I think it was in a Ringer column. Was it $1.4 million average for those running backs in the last 12 years? You were talking about the Super Bowl.
So you're looking at Pacheco, LeGarrette Blount, Jonas Gray. Sony Michel was on a rookie deal, so that helps. Yeah. Damian Williams is the leading rusher in the 2019 Chiefs. It's just And it's just you never see that with quarterbacks, right? Every single Super Bowl either has a superstar quarterback or a quarterback on rookie money surrounded by great offensive talent. And it's just so stark. It's like the running back does not carry teams to championships. And so you talk about, this is great. I know we don't have a ton of time left, but you talk about the Herschel Walker trade. And obviously the Herschel Walker trade stocked up Dallas, Darren Woodson, Emmitt Smith, Russell Maryland. They got all the players, to go with Jimmy Johnson. They won the Super Bowls. I think, though, that the thing that kept running backs alive for so long was that second Jimmy Johnson Super Bowl, because Emmitt Smith, after they won their first Super Bowl, he held out the first 2 weeks of 1993. And they got killed by the Washington Commanders in week 1. And they lost at home to Buffalo, the team they had just beaten in the Super Bowl the year before. Jerry goes back and negotiates a contract with Emmitt Smith. He comes back, leads the league in rushing in just 14 games, wins league MVP, wins the Super Bowl. And Emmitt Smith isn't even considered one of the most talented running backs of all time. I think we all look at Emmitt Smith as a great running back, but not the speed of Dickerson, not the elusiveness of Sanders, none of that. And Emmitt Smith kind of set running backs up for the next 20 years with that one act of sitting out and coming in and backing up his play.
Right. Look, I hope I didn't miss this when you were talking a little bit earlier. We talk about Mike Shanahan, those days in the Broncos, right? When you watch some of those backs coming through there, what he was doing with 5 to 7 round backs, I just always thought was amazing. His son does it as well. I mean, obviously they bring McCaffrey in for $16+ million. I get it. But the understanding of what they're doing in their system, the Shanahan system, so to speak, I just was always amazed at how they could keep popping them out there, with some of the great running backs that came through the Broncos.
Well, it's such a funny situation, because that should have been what we saw. That was like the first harbinger, right? Where not only you take the post Terrell Davis era, but Terrell Davis was a 6th round pick himself, right? That they've turned into a 2,000-yard back and a Hall of Fame player. And then they go from him to Orlando Scary, to Mike Anderson, to Reuben Drones, to Tatum Bell, to all they just go down the list. And then the other part is you take that scheme and you put it on to Kubiak, right? Kubiak with Kyle Shanahan with the Houston Texans. And then you're talking about Steve Slayton, which is not a high draft pick. You're talking about Arian Foster, led the league in rushing in that very offense as an undrafted player, right? And so that whole Shanahan system was getting, A+ production out of D+ investments at the position. And yes, now Kyle's doing the same. The interesting part about Kyle, and I want to, sort of, end on this, I guess, before we talk about solutions, but Shanahan still values running back, even though his system can very clearly get plus play out of mediocre talent, because they drafted Trey Sermon in the 3rd round and Elijah Mitchell in the 6th. Elijah Mitchell was better than him. And so then he still tries to get his guys at running back. It's just that it's funny how, other than McCaffrey, the guys that Shanahan always thought they drafted lower always did better than the guys he drafted higher, which to me is another part of this whole running backs thing, where it's like, we can't even predict them that well. So to pay them a lot of money is just not sound economics, because you're paying for an asset that you don't even know the true value of.
Completely agree. You were talking about solutions, though. What solutions are out there? I mean, how else do you approach it? I mean, again, I come back to Atlanta right now. Do you not think, let me separate myself a little bit. Let me ask you, as a media guy, sort of, but as a very opinionated person, where are you on that? Do you think, as good as Bijan is, and then as productive as Algiers has been, we'll use them as a case study.
Yeah.
What should they have done in your mind?
I think the Falcons should have taken an edge rusher, like a guy that could rush the passer. Just because I think they'll be pretty good, and I think if they get into a playoff game with a good quarterback, I think they're going to wish they had a pass rush more than they're going to wish they had a running back who's slightly better than Tyler Algier, right? Like that's my concern. Is I just think there's no. So maybe this is a good question. Is there any such thing as a luxury pick, Thomas? because we say that all, like running backs are considered, they're like when Edwards-Helaire went to the Chiefs and stuff like that, they're like, oh, our roster's stacked. Now we're making a strength to strength. It's like, and you know this, like your roster could be amazing one year and you get injuries and stuff and you really wish you had depth. You really wish you had high drafted depth. And I feel like the Falcons are foregoing that a little bit with taking Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, respectfully, there's no luxury picks when you're sub 500, right? It's just, I don't care how good. And they have some really nice looking players through there. Their offense, I mean, of course, they've bolstered up their defense and everything. Again, I was asking you from afar to say, like, okay, whether it was a DN they should have taken or whether they should have taken a corner to match up with Terrell, building that defense, which is going to be important. Arthur Smith had his time in Tennessee, right? He was around Henry. A lot of times we as general managers and head coaches, we pull off of our historical, processes, right? Where we were and what we saw. You and I have talked about it before with Tennessee. Is that an admission that they don't have a quarterback necessarily, and they're going to have a running back that's going to pull them through? Now they have a hell of a tight end, really blossoming receiver as well. Their O-line's coming together. I mean, that offense looks good. They just have to make sure that the quarterback's doing well. Is the running back going to be that important? Is that going to be a dual running back situation there? Or is it all?
You can only hand the ball to one running back per play. That's my other problem. And you really can only play one of them at a time. That's where I get worried. Whereas even wide receiver for the Falcons, and that was a bit high because no wide receiver got taken until the 20s. But after Drake London, it doesn't have a lot of depth there and so forth. So I get worried. I just get worried with them, to your point, where I think that they're behaving like a 500 team that needs one more player to be above, to be a playoff team, when in reality they're kind of a sub 500 team that still needs a little bit more to be in the mix. Now they have the easiest schedule in all of football. Every game, their average game is a point easier than the average game on a neutral field. So that helps, and that should help their running game. But I just think long term, I think that they're going to wish they had pass rushers to help their defense, because that's been a problem. That's been a problem for a long time with Atlanta, right? It's just is pass rushers. And they got Calais Campbell, David Onyemata, and Grady Jarrett, but all those players play interior, right? You need a guy from the edge, as we talked about last episode, to really rush the passer. I feel pretty fortunate to be talking to you about this, because you were a GM at the time before the rookie wage scale, where you actually had to agree to terms with a draft pick that was not cookie cutter, that actually there was some negotiation that went along with it, right? Right. To me, if you want to keep the NFL draft, that's the only way I think running backs ever get paid more, is basically you take away the rookie wage scale.
I don't know where to go with that. Colin, I love that. Great combo. You usually say the names. By the way, you have some advertising to do here as well, but I do.
I'm going to wait till the end, but yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Take away the rookie wage scale. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So Bijan Robinson doesn't get to negotiate an actual contract until I can't remember what age, until he's 25. Right. Yeah. And we know by this kind of idea here that, until he's into year 5 of his career, which we see as significantly on the down part, right? Now the draft isn't perfect because you can only negotiate with one team, the team that drafts you. I think a lot of purists would want just free agency for all draft players, and I think most people in the NFL would scoff at that because the draft is a great event. So short of that, if you took away the rookie wage scale, Bijan Robinson could negotiate with the Falcons at 8 and be like, look, you wanted me really badly at 8. And I'm a running back. I either want higher APY and I think what would happen more often, I want a 2-year deal with a 3rd year where I'm a restricted free agent. I don't know if that solves anything, but I think that is one chance that they have to make it more fair. Because look, if you're drafting an offensive lineman, and the offensive lineman's going to want a 6-year deal with you, Thomas, because by the time he gets out of years, he's a NFL lineman. He's worth it. He's worth everything. Like after year 3, you're gonna be like, look, this guy. Like look at your 2 draft picks. After 2 years, everybody's like, oh, these are busts, and now they're all pros, right? So they want a longer deal, right? Where the running backs are going to want a shorter deal by the virtue of who they are. That's I think might help them, but that only is because of the way in which their careers are sort of structured from a peak and a value sort of standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you mention that, I'm like, okay, yeah, I understand it hypothetically, but it's not going to happen, and I don't know how else to comment on it because this keeps coming back to me saying, as a former general manager and putting together a team, thinking I need some relief somewhere and some position besides the fullback position and besides maybe the kickers. I got to find some relief somewhere to be able to afford some of the marquee positions. And I do believe the running back position is a marquee position because I think they're so important. So I feel like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth, which most NFL executives probably are. But they're saying, never for the grace of God, go whatever position it is, and that's the way it is. So,
yeah, for sure. And I think there's a good LinkedIn user here that's coming in. QB salary increase is the crux of the problem. Their salaries have increased at a higher rate than the cap, and the running back position is bearing the brunt. Why can't the NFL increase the salary cap relative to the rate of QB increases? Well, I mean, they don't. There's no reason they should, right? Like they're increasing the cap commensurate with the increases in revenue and profits across the league. The teams are distributing the money to quarterbacks more because we found out how valuable the position is over time, and people want a piece of that. And like that's the whole point. Is like I wanted because I did a little bit of this on the Friday show, and we'll wrap up with this before we do our ad. Like my issue is it's not your job, Thomas, as the GM, to be a jobs program for running backs. It's not the job. It's the union's job not to negotiate such a bad CBA for the 8th straight time, for one. Like when they put the rookie wage scale into consideration, that was so that veterans could make more because veterans were angry that the Sam Bradfords of the world were making $50 million right out the gate. And they didn't understand that what it would cause was an incentive for GMs and team builders to prefer rookie deal players because they're cheaper, right? And it changed development and so beyond that, like you're not going to get anything different unless you change the rules. And if you change the rules, you better have a good solution because the solution to add the rookie wage scale, while it makes our jobs easier at Sumer, it's screwing like it is what's hurting the running back position right now because these running backs they come in at a fixed amount of years and all that kind of stuff. So I thought this was a good discussion. I think that people want to hear your perspective, Thomas, because you were in the chair and you made a lot of decisions in that realm. You were part of a team in New England that took a running back in the first round, but you were also part of a team that got tons of value out of that position. So I thought that this was good. Speaking of good, our folks at Circa Sports, they're sponsoring this show. They're having their Millions competition at the end of August. You have to sign up in Vegas, but you can play anywhere. They also have a Survivor competition. Thomas, I think you like Survivor the most because you get to every single week pick the team that you're sure is going to win, and you can't repeat teams. So if you blow it on Kansas City in week 1 and they win, good for you, but you can't use Kansas City ever again. So you got to be, as your master, you're a very deliberate master planner. You got to be able to go back and be like, well, I could take the Bills this week, but the Bills are playing the Arizona Cardinals later in the season, and that's a lock. So I don't want to lose them there. I think it's a very strategic game. You don't have to worry at all about the point spread either. It's just a game where you pick who is winning. The prize is substantial, and Circa will take care of you. They have a really cool hotel. They have a really cool place called Stadium Swim where you can watch games as well as swim in their amazing pools. So go to circasports.com for all the info. Thomas, what else is good? Are we? I know that we might stay under the 45-minute mark today. We'll see though.
We might, but I just want to go back to Circa Sports for a minute. Are the good people at Circa Sports reaching out to Sumer and bringing them out and doing a little bit of socializing there?
A few of us will be out there. Yeah, a few of us will be out there. We'll do at least one podcast from there. We'll shake some hands. Who knows? I might be able to get some Sumer swag out of you, Thomas, and we can give that away and have people walking around the strip with Sumer Sports t-shirts and hats. We'll wait on that. But yeah, that's the end of the month. I'm imagining some subset of us will be out there for week 0 of the college football season. So if you are at all inclined to go out there during the heat of the winter, or sorry, of the summer, I'm sorry. Yeah, that'll be a fun time.
Fantastic. Well, you guys have a great time out there. Give them a good handshake for management on this side of the world.
Yeah, for sure. So this has been great. If you like the show, subscribe, hit the like button, give a comment. The best comments are through the podcast platforms. Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We really appreciate you all coming. I think this has been a good discussion. I think everybody who has talked about running backs, except for us, has missed the mark at least a little bit, but it was really good. And that's why I wanted to do it, because I just kind of wanted to get, your perspective on it, as well as sort of the history of the position. So great time. This has been Thomas Dimitroff for Eric Eager. This has been episode 83 of the Sumer Sports Show.